Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Wadjuk people, and we'd like to pay respect to elders of the Noongar Nation, past and present, who have walked and cared for the land, and we acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contributions made to the life of this city and this region. I declare the council members' briefing open at 18:01. Please note that audio-visual proceedings of tonight's meeting will be recorded with the exception of matters discussed behind closed doors. The broadcast of the proceedings of council can be accessed live and on demand through the City of Wanneroo Council Meeting YouTube channel. Attendances, we have a leave of absence from Councillor Berry. We have an apology from Councillor Treby, an apology from the Chief Executive Officer, and an apology from Councillor Sangelli. That's everyone, isn't it? Okay. Item 3, deputations. Deputations are to be presented during the briefing session at item 3 in the order of business. Deputations must relate to a report on the current briefing agenda. A deputation is not to exceed 3 speakers in number, and only those speakers may address the council members. Speakers of a deputation will collectively have a maximum of up to 10 minutes, dependent on the number of deputations received, to address the council members, unless an extension of time is granted. A deputation is to be in the form of statement, and no debate or discussion on the matter is to occur. Questions from council members relating to the subject matter should be reserved until administration has presented on the relevant report during the meeting. However, a point of clarification by a council member on a specific statement may be permitted. There is an opportunity for public question time for members of the public item 7 in the order of business. The following deputation has been confirmed. The speaker is Henry Pestranovic, and it's on item 4.4, response to the petition PTO2 1122 about the requesting to remove speed humps from Blackmore Avenue, Girraween. Mr Pestranovic, would you like to come and bring your deputation? Mr Pestranovic, if you could just tell us your name and the suburb you live in, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. Pestranovic is my name, Henry Pestranovic, and I live at 26 Berglund Drive, Girraween. Am I too loud? No, it's all right? Okay. It's got a bit of a feedback. Good evening, Madam Mayor and all the councillors. I refer to the briefing papers 4.4, response to petition PTO2. My place of residence, as I mentioned, 26 Berglund Drive, Girraween. I acknowledge and thank the Director of Assets, if he's here, supplying an in-depth report. Is he here, or if you could just mention to thank him for it? And I note that the report states administration has carried out no consultation regarding support of any alternative treatments to Blackmore Avenue regarding lowering speed and increasing safety. In my view, the port partly meets the criteria for a decision regarding the speed humps. There are 3 missing pieces of information from this report, and I will highlight these in a few minutes. A quick background to the petition. Now, I lived in Berglund Drive for over 25 years. In October this year, the council removed the speed humps to resurface the road, new curbing, and reinstalling the humps at a lower height. I might add, many residents didn't know that was happening. I didn't know either. And they started to question all the work people with what's happening. Now, the idea of eliminating the humps, to me, with other alternatives, it appealed to me. So I discussed with nearby residents, encouraged by a result from the Facebook follower, Ice as a Lemon of Blackmore Avenue, who formed an online petition to remove speed humps on Blackmore Avenue. It received an overwhelming 75% of removal of such humps. Now, the hatred for these humps are very evident. Now, with general advice from Councillor James Rowe, Thank you very much. I embarked on a petition with resolve to reach as many residents at the time frame that I thought I had, because I thought that's going to be reinstalled late November. Now, and to me, if the result was 50-50, it was just going to be a waste of my time. My approach to residents was to knock on the door, step 2 or 3 paces back, introduce myself and why I'm there for a petition to remove the humps. There was genuine jubilation amongst the residents. They thought I was part of the council, and they wished to sign immediately without any further ado. But anyway, I thought that they would need to know about some alternatives, and I gave them some alternatives, and there's more obviously around the place. And they put down some, if you are privy to all those sheets, I went street by street. But they all acknowledged that some speed calming devices required on Blackmore. Not one has said to remove and have nothing. Now, I door knocked 193 houses, recorded 110 votes, and 97% of those, which is 107, voted to remove the speed humps. Sometimes you get 2 people, sometimes 3 people. That's why the percentage is a little bit funny. On Blackmore Avenue, there are 58 houses with only 29 voted. People go away, whatever the case may be. Couldn't get all to them. I couldn't get back to them, by the way, because I had to keep on going. There's too many streets. I received an overwhelming vote of 117%. So 34 people out of 29 houses voted. And once again, the hatred was there. Now, overall, the petition of 110 votes was recorded. And 97%, which is 107, wanted the speed humps removed. Now, this is a rhetorical question. One must ask why the hatred of speed humps had 75% favour by Blackmore residents alone in October and November 2018. Is hatred misplaced? Was it wrong? I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, I'll give you some examples, and I'm sure you probably would know if you went over speed humps anyway. The bump-up noises throughout the night, day, the vehicles slowing down or braking hard to go over the humps and speeding off again. Noise, noise, noise. We're not talking about traffic noise in a sense. We're talking about the noise coming from the vehicle going over the hump. Now, those vehicles, obviously, tradies laden with toolboxes, they're noisy. Residents in the middle of Blackmore Avenue, they wake up with a big noise and trailers being dislodged from their vehicles. Hoo-ha. Nails, screws and stuff down the bottom of Blackmore Avenue towards Beach Road. Lady goes out there and picks up all the nails and screws and whatever else that comes off these vehicles. Sometimes, and also down towards that part, there's a resident that says, well, why don't the councillors come in here between 10 o'clock at night and midnight, and they'll hear the tradies, because sometimes they're late, and they'll come along and the people just speed over the humps, especially with the four-wheel drive, of course. Burnouts using the humps itself, so there's a lot of noise. So the first missing piece of the report is that a lot of residents feel that the humps do not really drop the speed or get the speeders. That's the ones we want to get. I acknowledge that humps do knock the speed down a bit, and if the speed humps are reinstalled at a lower height, well, can you guess what's going to happen to the speeders? They're going to go over there faster. And moderate drivers like me, maybe go a little bit faster over those humps as well to get home. Because people are going down to the shops, the IGA, and come back hump all the time. Now, obviously, there's a problem with rat runs. I'm not sure what you mean by rat runs. They are people like myself even, will not go down Blackmore Avenue, will go side street, back streets. So there's an increase of traffic that probably the council didn't realise down the track that would happen. So at this point, before I go into that, I must ask why Department of Transport, government departments, the Council Transport Services, did not envisage a problem with the height of these vehicles affecting emergency vehicles in the first place. Right. So I feel that Transperth was concerned about driver and passenger complaints because of the jolt going over the pumps. So, there could be litigation here. So let's do something about it. Drop the height of the humps, resurface the road, do some add work to the curbing, and consequently that's how I looked at it too. So before putting them back, hey, let's do something else perhaps. So fixing one problem has created others. And the list goes on. You've got ambulance patients, you've got fire brigade guys. There's a burnout in November of last year on Burglen Drive. I don't know why, whether they were speeding, hit the gas tank or the diff. But the fire brigade we called out. Can you imagine those poor firemen at the back of the truck going over all these humps? And they take slower to get there as well. Experience, and also you've got families with station wagons. The kids experience and the people at the back that got nothing to hang on to. They just sit in the seat. They're not actually having a steering wheel. So they possibly feel the jolt, get a bit of pain. And one resident, very good, and is actually very astute what he's done, he said that the humps possibly could not have been installed right in the first place, meaning you can just imagine a hump and you're going towards a hump. Now, if that hump hasn't got a gradual increase, the tyres will hit the hump and there's a jolt. Then you got over the top and the other side again. Now, Gordon Martin in Burglen Drive, where I live, he brought that to my attention. I thought that was pretty good because even the sign saying 20 kilometres an hour, a wrongly installed hump will cause damage to the vehicle shock absorbers, struts. And he pointed out too, Geralt Road, leading to the Kingsway Shopping Centre over Hepburn, where Woolworths service station was there, that was a gradual increase and over. So maybe the engineering department need to have a look at that. Now, I've spoken to 6 residents who want to sue the council. I said, okay. They have problems with their shock absorbers, male and female. Now, I use the word hatred. It's a very, very touchy word, very harsh word. But the residents along Blackmore Avenue are silently screaming for peace and reprieve for the thumping noise they endured for the last 3 to 4 years. Now, we do know that, according to the report, thank you for the Director of Assets, they did a car count. So from Templeman Avenue...
Excuse me, Mr Pistranovich, you've been speaking for 10 minutes. Do we have... okay, so we have a mover with James Rowe to extend deputation and Councillor Baker seconding it. Thank you.
Okay.
You can keep talking now. It's just you've had 10 minutes, so we needed to get approval.
Okay, I've got a little bit to go, then I'll do a conclusion.
Thank you.
Right. So, speed humps are often aligned as safe, calming devices for speed control by what is safe. So the second part of this is in the environment. According to resident Gordon Martin, once again in Girraween, he lives and walks and has a disability. He walks every day along Blackmore Avenue and beyond, and he can smell exhaust fumes a lot of the time, especially on a windless day. You've got kids walking down the street, you've got playgrounds around there, so you've got this added scenario of carbon monoxide, and which can cause dizziness, confusion, blurred vision, loss of consciousness, according to Sydney Morning Herald. They're saying that humps must go. Okay, and the second thing, psychological stress. And I mentioned they screaming in peace and repeat from the thumping. Can you imagine what this does all day, every day to the people, especially the middle of Blackmore Avenue, because they've got nowhere to go. I can turn around and go at the back, but these people in the middle can't do anything. So they've got to have this. So forced technology, they're saying stress, adrenaline causes hormones, etc. The cortisol going. I won't go into the health scenario of that. Noise, traffic noise, biometrical centre about sensitivity, noise, annoyance. It's all psychological. So the conclusion of this, you've got to listen to the people, the voice of the people. 97% of the people want the humps removed. 107 people, for good sound reasons. It's not a wish, but a cry for help. If someone received injuries from a fall whilst walking on a footpath, I can mention this, if you think about this one, because of a paving had been damaged to climatic conditions, leaving it exposed, and has proved the council negligence, litigation could follow. Psychological stress is something that's going over in Europe, and what goes in Europe and America will follow us. I appreciate that councillors have heavy council matters to attend to, and you also need a life and to be with your families. However, the voice of the people, I've got a handout, which I'll leave somewhere. A gentleman in Boogland Drive, Ridvan, had a different point of view of putting in chicanes that you might be interested in. And I will actually forward emails to every councillor of more alternatives. The voice of the people want drivers to be able, just think about this, the voice of the people wants drivers, especially in Blackmore Avenue, to be able to enter and exit Blackmore Avenue in a safe, calm and most effortless manner possible. It doesn't happen now. With good, bad, whatever the case, it doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen to the drivers either. You can imagine, okay, so I have 3 impact statements which I'll send an email to all the councillors. So I want to leave this particular sentence to you. I want you to think about the environmental impact and the genuine psychological stress that these people face. Madam Mayor, I thank you for the opportunity to present the voice of the people to Blackmore Avenue.
Thank you, Mr Pestranovic. I've just got one question to Mr Singh. I note that in the comments that the humps might not have been installed correctly. In one of the comments, I would understand that we would have guidelines to go by. Could you respond to that, please, Mr Singh?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The speed hump's been installed as per the salient standard design. They fully comply with the standards.
Okay, and when we redid the road, apparently the road's been redone. They were done slightly differently, is that correct? Because the standards had changed since they were originally installed?
No, thanks, Mayor. No, they will be done exactly the same way they were done before, with similar kind of structure and similar kind of line marking and the height.
Okay, thank you, Mr Singh. Thank you, Mr Pestranovic. Thank you for coming to bring your deputation today. We're moving on to to reports now, item 4. If there's any declarations of interest by council members, including the nature and extent of the interest, they're to be made at the commencement of the item to which the interest relates. A declaration of interest forms are to be completed and handed to the Chief Executive Officer or the Acting Chief Executive Officer, Mrs Jennings. So we'll go to item 4.1. Strategic Land Use Planning and Environment. Would you like to speak to any of these items this evening?
Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. This evening, Planning and Sustainability has 3 reports on the agenda. The first 2 reports are from Strategic Land Use Planning and Environment. The purpose of these reports are for Council to consider the annual review of cost estimates for the Yanchep Two Rocks Development Contribution Plan and the Alkimos-Eglinton Development Contribution Plan. The third report is from Health and Compliance on Administration's review of Local Planning Policy 4.14 compliance. I do not intend to introduce these reports as these matters have previously been before Council or discussed at forum. Manager Strategic Land Use Planning and Environment, Emile van Heinigen, and I are happy to answer any questions from Council members on these reports.
Thank you, Mr Pickett. Item 4.1, Yanchep Two Rocks DCP Annual Review of Costs 2022-23. Do I have any questions about this item? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through the Chair, if I can, please. In terms of item 4.1, I'll deal with 4.2 shortly. In terms of item 4.1, the report makes reference to the term Development Contribution Area, known as a DCA, and that area appears to be depicted in attachment number 1. That's attachment number 1 to 4.1. And of course, that area clearly shows the two districts or suburbs of Yanchep and Two Rocks. Correct? Yes. There's also reference, of course, to the Capricorn Coastal Node facilities, which of course really is at the centre of this particular agenda item. It makes reference to the various infrastructure that would be used by way of facilities of that kind, including footpaths, roads, paved drainage, etc., fences, gates, outbuildings, walkways. Where can I get a definitive list of those various items of infrastructure? Because, at least in my copy of the agenda, attachment 3 includes other districts or suburbs, such as Alkimos, Eglinton. The itemisation in attachment 3 appears to relate to other districts or suburbs rather than the two suburbs within the DCA.
Councillor Baker, I think the item, the DCP, I'll get the acting director to speak to it, but we're to speak to this item, which is the structures that are going to be built under the DCP, not to the paths and what's being designed in the paths. That's under the developer, how they do that in a different, it's not part of the DCP. I think that's correct. Is that correct, Mr Pickett?
Madam Mayor, I may defer that question to the Manager of Strategic Land Use Planning and Environment.
Thank you.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, in the first instance, the DCP covers the district structure plan for Alkimos and Eglinton, so that's in line with the attached map. In terms of the Capricorn facilities, that will be part of that is part of a development application that was approved by the state government, so we can make that information available to you. Yeah, so in terms of the development, the DCP, we still need to clarify exactly what will be covered by the DCP, because the developer may include other things that they would need to pay for.
If I can, please, Madam Mayor.
How many questions have you got, Mr Baker? Councillor Baker?
Just a couple of others, I think. Madam
Just
Mayor,
two more? Okay.
Just on this particular agenda item.
Just two more questions on this agenda item. Okay, thank you.
All right. It's just that the itemisation refers to not just the suburbs in the DC area, but other suburbs which aren't in the actual area, the DCA area, such as Eglinton and Alkimos. They're separate and distinct suburbs or districts relative to Yanchep and Two Rocks. It's Yanchep and Two Rocks that form part of the DCA, correct? And yet the itemisation provided includes expenditure items in those other suburbs, whereas we're dealing with the DCP in relation to, as the title of the agenda item says, Yanchep-Two Rocks DCP Annual Review of Costs.
Thank you, Mr Van
I'm just
Haken.
confused, I'm sorry.
Through you, Mayor, this report 4.1 only relates to Alkimos Eglinton, so it only covers the Capricorn Coastal Node is the only outstanding DCP item in that DCP. Item 4.2 refers to Alkimos Eglinton, so that deals with all the infrastructure to be provided through that DCP.
But if I can, and just to, I think you see the obvious question, Madam Mayor, that's the point. 4.1 relates to the Yanchep Two Rocks DCP and 4.2 to the Eglinton Alkimos DCP, two separate DCPs, so to speak. So there seems to have been overlapping in terms of the schedules of payments, or the per meterage rates, market values.
Mr Van
Perhaps I can
Haken.
leave it. I'll put it in writing if this is.
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, no, 4.1 only relates to the infrastructure in Yanchep Two Rocks, and that's the Capricorn Coastal Node. It doesn't cover any other infrastructure. That's the only remaining piece of infrastructure. Yeah.
The expenditure referred to refers to expenditure of infrastructure in Alkimos and Eglinton as well. that surely that would be caught by the separate DCP for referred
Yeah.
to in item 4.2.
Could I ask that, could you refer me to the page that's outlined in?
Just bear with me. Well, in terms of the actual formal agenda, page 19 of the agenda, you'll see there's a table there. You'll see the headings at the top: Library District, Indoor Recreation Centre, Alkimos, Indoor Recreation Centre, Eglinton, etc., etc., etc. It may well be that the schedules have been mixed up, so to speak, in the collating process.
Okay.
Thank
Through you,
you.
Mayor, I will double check the attachments and make sure that there's no, misplaced attachments for council meeting next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Rowe, do you have a question? Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Page 3 of the agenda is outlining the effect of interest rates on loans to fund the infrastructure. I was wondering if the city puts in place measures or contingencies to respond to the volatility in the interest rates borrowings, just because there's been quite significant change in the interest rates themselves in the last 6 to 12 months.
Thank you. Mr Van Hayden.
Through you, Mayor, the city has allocated, allowed the interest to 2030 in the long-term financial plan for these loans. If there's more lots that will be created through the development industry, the loans could actually be paid off earlier, in which case the city will save money. As you know, it's directly linked to the number of lots created. So depending on what the economic situation and the construction industry is like, it might actually be paid off earlier. And also the funding requirements are assessed on an annual basis to make sure that the city gets the best deal. If there's anything else the director wants to add.
Thank you. Councillor Miles, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. My question, I guess, relates to the increase, because even under your notation for recommendation for next week, it means that the cost per dwelling is going to go up by $4,200, just based on the increases that we've seen through the bank interest, I guess, primarily of the loan for Splendid Park. How many more lots are we projected to be built in that area, bearing in mind that we really should be setting a DCP over the maybe, I don't know how many lots in total the whole area is supposed to be, because otherwise we could end up I wouldn't say overcharging, but we could end up charging, say 150 or 200 lots, this extra 4,000, but then next year we may have to reduce it because interest rates have reduced again. So I guess these spikes, we're not really levelling them out, which is really what a DCP is supposed to do.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. If you're looking at item 1B, that's the cost per dwelling is already $3,909 and it's going up to $4,287, which is a bit over $300 per lot. But Mr Van Hayden, would you like to clarify that, please, if that's a correct interpretation?
Through you, Mayor. With the DCPs, that's why we annually review the DCPs. So when we annually review the DCPs, we look at the total outstanding infrastructure cost, we looked at the land valuation, and we looked at the administration cost. So that's why this is a true reflection of what the situation is currently. So when the circumstances change in future years, then the annual review will cover it at that stage. So if there's less interest, then that will be reflected, or if the infrastructure costs go down, then that will be reflected through the annual review at that stage. The purpose of the annual review is to make sure that there's sufficient funds available to cover all the infrastructure for the lifetime of the DCP. So you're right, the costs have increased significantly, the infrastructure cost 20% in Yanchep 2 Rocks. And the loan amount also increased significantly. So those are the two reasons why there's an increase in the cost per dwelling. But the cost per dwelling, to answer the Mayor's question, is 3.9 thousand, and it increases to 4.2 5,000 cost per dwelling as per this annual review.
And also looking at the chart that you've provided in there, where most of the items, to be honest, most of the items in that DCP have been built, which is primarily, as Councillor Baker said, Splendid Park. Is that DCP going to be reviewed under the state government's new policy on reviewing a DCP every 10 years?
Through you, Mayor, this DCP runs until 2030. So this one is it's almost completed, the DCP, the life of the DCP. So if there are other facilities beyond the life of this DCP, then that most probably would be a different DCP. We'll probably be preparing another DCP that follows this. So in terms of, if you're referring to the caps that the state government is included in the state planning policy, the cities had discussions with the state government to include indexing of that cap. As you know, the cap is 5,000 per dwelling at the moment. It's been 5,000 since the state planning policy has been gazetted, so it's not in correlation with the substantial cost increases that we're experiencing. So we have requested the Minister's Office for indexation as part of that. So the state government is looking at that at the moment, and we will keep the council up to date with that, because that's very important in terms of implications for the city in covering community facilities as part of DCPs.
So just to clarify part of what you said there, which was part of my reason, part of my question, was as we know, under the state planning policy that's now been advised, where there's a maximum limit, and I totally support what administration's doing there with the Planning Commission. So you think that there will have to be another DCP for that area, especially when we've got the new town centre coming on and other areas, when the community infrastructure for that area is virtually nil still, but we've got another 200,000 people coming in. So you can envisage that this won't be reignited, but however, a new DCP will come in and take over this one? Is that how you explain it?
Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, yes, it is possible that there will be another DCP. This one will be closed once all the infrastructure has been delivered. So once the Capricorn Coastal Node is completed and all the costs have been covered, then this one will close. So the scheme, it will be taken out of the planning scheme. And then at that stage, when there's a need for more infrastructure, then the city will consider whether a DCP is appropriate to cover that infrastructure. But that will be a totally new infrastructure because the city needs to negotiate with the landowners, with the community in terms of what needs to be covered and also the details of the DCP. And then obviously the council will have opportunity to consider that at that stage.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Are there any more questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Yes, just a matter arising from what Councillor Miles has just raised, and once again dealing with 4.2, correct? 4.2.
4.1.
4.1. I'll leave it for 4.2, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no more questions, yes, Councillor Nguyen.
The report made reference there being no submissions to the proposal. How many landowners are there that's covered by the DCP? Or this area? Mr
Van Hayden.
Through you, Mayor, I'll have to take that on notice, but because it's the coastal corridor, there are essentially only the large developers. So we consult with them as a group. So it's not really small, like you have in East Wanneroo where there's multiple landowners. There's probably only like 4 or 5 big companies that own most of the land there, which makes it easier for the DCP in terms of consulting and also in terms of working with the developers.
Yes, and that's what I assume.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. You want to ask another question, do you, Councillor Nguyen?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
So with these large developers, they obviously are aware of the council's proposal and they have made submissions in response. Does that mean that they accept what's been proposed?
Through you, Mayor, yes, the developers were part of the preparation of this DCP. So when it was actually prepared, the city consulted with the developers. So they are totally aware of all of it and how it works and that, and supported. And there's been no submissions, and that reflects the fact that they are happy with the infrastructure and the annual review.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Any more questions? Thank you, Councillor Baker.
Thank you. Yes, just going to paragraph 2 on page 5. It states, and I quote, whilst no submissions were received, comma, landowners may still object to the amount and cost, contribution, etc., and request a review by an independent expert. If this does not result in a cost contribution being acceptable, then a determination may be made through a process of arbitration. Correct?
Thank you, Mr
That's
Van
what it
Hayden.
states. Who conducts the arbitration, and is there an appeal if the arbitration is unsuccessful, or is there a further review if an agreement cannot be reached as a result of arbitration, please?
Thank you, Mr Baker. Mr Van Hayden.
Sorry, there's a fly bugging me, yeah? So a very lazy fly, yeah? So through you, Mayor, so the arbitration, the parties, if there is I suppose an appeal, the two parties, the city and on behalf of the DCP and whoever submits that will have to work out an independent arbitrator. But that's highly unlikely from our experience, and we would have known about it through discussions.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Are there any more questions on this item? If there are no more questions, we'll progress to item 4.2. Are there any questions on item 4.2? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you once again, Madam Mayor. And this is similar to the question asked about 4.1. I think you'll see what I'm getting at very shortly. It's pretty obvious, I would have thought. But once again, in terms of 4.2, titled Alkimos-Eglinton DCP Annual Review of Costs, there's reference to the development contribution area. And the area consists of 2 suburbs, or what are strictly called districts. Number 1, Alkimos, number 2, Eglinton. I think you'd agree, okay? And if you turn to the map, you'll see that that is the case. That is the plan. The plan actually includes just those 2 suburbs. But notwithstanding that, there are certain costs which are lumped together from 2 other districts, namely Yanchep and Turox. And I refer to attachment number 3. It's the cost plan summary. It was prepared by Donald Cant Watts Cork Consultants. It quotes, and I state, facilities located in Alkimos, Eglinton and Turox. Why is the suburb of Turox included in the DCP area for the purpose of that chart? And if you go down the chart, you'll see there's a separate heading. It reads Yanchep and Turox. Why is it that Yanchep and Turox costs are included in the Alkimos, Eglinton DCP?
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden.
Through you, Mayor. Yeah, so that attachment that you're referring to, the company that the city hired to undertake that work, they got the task to assess both DCPs. So that is the result of their assessment, and they've just included both in there. That doesn't actually, what we'll do is we'll include a note to make it clear that this only covers this DCP and it excludes that, or we can block out the irrelevant bits from that attachment. We'll do that for next week.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Are there any more questions on this item? Yes, thank you, Councillor Baker.
Just to follow up to what's just been said, of course, when we dealt with 4.1, the remaining item was the Capricorn Coastal Node Facilities, of course, which were raised, of course, and discussed, of course. And whereas the term used in attachment 3 to item 4.2 makes reference to beach activity community facilities. Are the 2 synonymous? Capricorn Coastal Node Facilities in 4.1 and in 4.2, Yanchep Turox Beach Activity Community Facilities, because the monetary sum's the same, 2.9 million.
Mr Van Hayden.
Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, I'll have to take that on notice, but I suspect it's the same. They're talking about the same thing. They're just using the wrong wording for it.
Thank you.
Do I have any more questions on this item? Yes, councillor Nguyen.
If indexation to the cap doesn't apply and the proposed DCP rate is at the moment over $5,000 per lot, what does that mean when we actually vote to approve the rate of $5,900 per lot?
Ms Van Hayden. What page are you looking at, councillor Nguyen?
Page 26, under the comment, paragraph 2, cost escalation, and one of the comments relates to that the average lot size of the revised DCP rate would equate to over $5,900 per lot. So if we were to proceed on that basis, does that mean that in future, if we get clarification from the minister, we then have to revise the maximum rate down to $5,000 per lot?
Thank you, Ms Van Hayden.
Through you, Mayor. So that paragraph that you're referring to, that is the part of the submission from the landowner. So that is the landowner's assessment of what the cost is. The city is not aware. We've sought clarification from the Department of Planning because the SPP, the cap, only relates to per dwelling. It doesn't relate to an area-based DCP such as this one. So we are awaiting their advice on that. But in terms of our calculations, it's at this stage not 5,000. It's not yet at 5,000, but it will in the coming years, potentially next year or the year after, actually exceed that. So if the state government includes the indexation, then there wouldn't really be an issue. However, if the state government keeps it at 5,000, then that may have implications for in the coming years. At this stage, it's still under the 5,000 according to our calculations, but we have sought that advice specifically.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Do you have another question, councillor Nguyen? Thank you.
And when do you expect to get a response? Do you think we might get that before next week?
Through you, Mayor, we have been waiting for quite a while. We've been following it up. We will try again before next week, but I can't guarantee that. I think that I don't think they have considered this when they included the 5,000. I think, it's just one of those things that relates to the implementation of something in a policy that you don't always foresee before you actually have the policy in place.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Do you have another question? Yes, councillor Nguyen.
If it's not indexed and it's fixed to $5,000 per lot, does that mean that we need to revise the potential facilities or look at some other funding measure to cover the deficit?
Ms Van Hayden.
Through you, Mayor, yes. If the state government decides not to index or not to increase the cost every year based on the infrastructure costs, then the city will potentially be short in terms of funding for the community facilities, which means that the city will have to find alternative funding sources. When the state planning policy was prepared and was gazetted, the state government did indicate that they expect local governments to look at alternative funding sources, and they were referring to grants and that, and they were essentially implying that grants could and will be provided to compensate for shortfalls in DCPs. However, the city's submission at the time was that there's no guarantee on that, and loans and grants are very uncertain by its nature, and the city cannot prepare for that because it gets assessed from year to year, and you don't know whether the city will be getting it or not. I don't know if that answers your questions, but essentially, yeah, we will have to look at alternative funding sources. The DCP is one of the funding sources, and that's got implications for community facility provision. Also, what the city could potentially reassess the community facilities, the number of community facilities, or the specifications in terms of the building of the facilities to potentially see if there's ways of saving in terms of different designs and that. Also, again, in our submission to the SPP, we refer to that the SPP cap might have implications for the way that the city provides community facilities, because the DCPs only cover local and district facilities and not regional, and it might potentially have implications for that.
So
Thank you,
just
Mr Van Hayden. Do you have another
just a-
question, Councillor Nguyen?
I do. Thank
Okay,
you,
go
Mayor.
ahead.
If it was to be indexed, how do you think it will be indexed? Is that by CPI or some sort of annual review at a fixed rate or some other measure?
Through you, Mayor, the state government is looking at that. I can't talk on their behalf, but it would probably be related to infrastructure, their assessment of what the cost of infrastructure provision is. So, for instance, if they consider that across the state there's a general 10% increase in infrastructure cost, then they could potentially link it to that. But that won't be part of the state planning policy. They are looking at potentially including that in a different mechanism, so that the state planning policy just refers to there is a cap, but not make mention of the amount, and that some other document potentially could refer to the actual indexation. Otherwise, you have to change the SPP every time you change the amount.
Thank you, Mr Van Hayden. Are there any more questions on this item? If there are no more questions on this item, we'll go to item 4.3, which is Local Planning Policy Compliance 414 Review. Are there any questions on this item? Yes, thank you, Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor, and I'll preface the question by thanking the Acting Director for all the work that his team does, particularly on a couple of ongoing compliance issues in my ward. The first question is regarding, can compliance action be fast-tracked or escalated in situations where a landowner has repeatedly ignored compliance requests, or does the principle of education over compliance apply universally, regardless of the track record of a landowner?
Thank you, Mr Pickett.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Yes, Councillor Rowe, in relation to your question, compliance processes can be fast-tracked or escalated for repeat offenders. It can also be fast-tracked in circumstances that relate to dangerous or unsafe works or matters of significant nuisance with a high risk of adversely impacting on public amenity or health or safety. In those circumstances, administration may issue a notice or a building order, an infringement notice, or commence a prosecution. Generally, the consideration relates to whether or not it's in the public interest to do so, and it's based on the specific circumstances of non-compliance.
Thank you, Mr Pickett. Do you have another question, Councillor Rowe? Thank you, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you. Just one more, Mayor. In regard to a specific case that's operating in my ward, one of the most consistent comments I get from residents is, can we lodge a complaint with the Health Department for a potential violation of the Public Health Act or environmental laws? So does the state carry out any investigations, or are these complaints, when they're received by the Health Department, immediately delegated back to the local government authority for your environmental health officers to investigate? So essentially, does the state have any direct enforcement responsibility, or is it just limited to the regulation of public health?
Thank you, Mr Pickett.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. The Department of Health plays a key role, I guess, in establishing the legislative framework that underpins the protection of public health across Western Australia. But they do have investigative powers under the Public Health Act and the Food Act and subsidiary legislation. But often what they will do is they will delegate those complaints to the respective local government authority to investigate. And local government authorities will investigate those complaints by commencing an environmental health investigation. The qualified officer will gather facts, interview business proprietors or property owners, and we'll make a judgment based on the framework of the legislation, and they will also be guided by the statutory responsibilities and administrative procedures.
Thank you, Mr Piggott. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through the Chair, just a further question. The policy we're currently discussing in respect to this agenda item is a policy relating to planning and building compliance, correct?
Yes, through you, Mayor, that's correct,
not health
Councillor Baker.
Thank you,
regulation.
Mr Piggott.
Not health regulation enforcement.
That's correct,
Right,
Councillor
then.
Baker.
And you've made reference to, of course, the fact that in certain circumstances a prosecution may be instituted, there will be a penalty applicable, but isn't it the case that several of the provisions within our DPS also contain a daily penalty for every day of non-compliance, depending upon the nature and extent of the non-compliance? In other words, there's a penalty, so a fine of up to $10,000, but for every day of non-compliance, there's a daily penalty. In other words, it's an added built-in incentive for example, a developer in a given case to comply with the terms of the DA or a building permit if a building permit is required. That is the case, isn't it?
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Thank you, Mr Piggott.
Through you, Mayor, in terms of the legislation, there is often a penalty that can be imposed by a magistrate upon conviction, and it also falls upon the magistrate to make a determination as to whether or not it is appropriate to also impose daily penalties if the offence is of an ongoing nature. But that does rest with the magistrate, not with the local government.
But
Thank
if
you,
I can,
Mr Piggott. Councillor Baker, you want another question?
two more, if I can, please, Madam Mayor.
Two more
There might be a couple of sub-paragraphs in either. I'll just
Two
do one.
questions. Thank you.
Each with a couple. Yes, that's a matter for the magistrate to determine, of course, but nonetheless, the prosecutor can make submissions as to the merits of imposing a daily penalty for up to, let's just assume it's a month of non-compliance, 30 days of non-compliance, 30 days at $2,000 per day, in addition to the actual substantive fine for the primary offence, correct? That's a matter for the prosecutor to submit as applicable, an applicable additional sentencing disposition, correct?
Yes, Mr Piggott, you can answer that.
Through you, Mayor, it is open to the local government to pursue that. Often that judgment is made based on the circumstances of the matter and the facts of the case, and the city often takes guidance from its legal counsel in that regard.
Thank you, Mr Piggott. And your second question,
Thank you,
Councillor
Madam
Baker.
Mayor. My question relates to the revised policy that will be before the City next week for approval. I refer to page 69 of the agenda. I refer to paragraphs 8.1 and 8.2. 8.1 sets out the obvious, that when the building works are completed, that a Form BA7 is to be filed with the City, okay? And of course, if that form is not submitted, the responsible person may be liable to a penalty of $10,000. And of course, that form is required to be submitted so the City knows that the construction is in effect certified as being completed. But the next paragraph, I need to ask a very pointed question, 8.2. With respect to commercial buildings, as opposed to other buildings, with respect to commercial buildings, the City issues a certificate of occupancy which confirms that which confirms to the world, so to speak, that the building has been completed in accordance with the conditions of the building permit. My understanding is that the City does not inspect every commercial building once its compliance team has received a Form BA7 confirming completion. Are there exclusion clauses in the certificate of occupancy issued by the City, which is a representation of the world, so to speak, exclusion clauses stating that, yes, the build has confirmed with the conditions attached to complied with the conditions attached to the permit, and the building is suitable to be occupied. However, the City has not actually carried out an inspection to confirm the accuracy or otherwise of the BA7, which was lodged by the permit holder or the permit holder's agent. That is the case, isn't it? How can we confirm something's been constructed properly without inspecting it first to confirm that that is the case and the conditions attached to the permit have been complied with?
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Mr Piggott?
Through you, Mayor, the certificate of occupancy is often lodged by a qualified private building surveyor, and the City is, I guess, bound to respect the professional competency of that qualified and licensed professional.
Thank you, Mr Piggott. Another question, Councillor Baker?
Yeah, that's the case where the agent of the owner submits that certificate, but the actual policy requires the City itself to issue a certificate of occupancy? Does the city simply issue the owner's agent's certificate back to the owner? I mean, surely the wording is very clear. The city has to issue the certificate of occupancy. The builder might be able to issue a certificate of purported compliance and occupancy, but that doesn't mean, of course, that the city is therefore not obliged to actually issue its certificate of occupancy.
Thank you, Councillor
With a city
Baker.
seal on it, so to speak.
Mr Pickett, would you like to respond to that?
Through you, Mayor, the receipt of a notice of completion is signed off by a qualified building surveyor, and then once that notice of completion has been received, then that gives the city the assurance that a certificate of occupancy can be issued.
Thank you, Mr Pickett. Are there any other questions on this item? Councillor Nguyen.
What's the city's attitude to a situation where a landowner is not sure whether a building is approved or not and asks administration to come out and inspect let's say the shed, and the city comes out and inspect and that shed is not approved, would the city issue an enforcement or request a retrospective application to rectify the unapproved structure?
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen. Mr Pickett, would you like to respond to that? Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, administration may invite the owner of the property to submit a retrospective application for approval, or may also put it to the owner that they may wish to remove that unauthorised structure.
Thank you, Mr Pickett. Councillor Nguyen, you've got another question?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
There is a potential risk for a landowner who wants to do the right thing to ask the city to investigate, but then having to rectify that if they don't have the approval for that building structure.
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen. Mr Pickett, would you like to respond?
Through you, Mayor, administration holds the view that the risk that exists is a risk of safety to the owner and the occupier of that premises by having an unauthorised structure on their premises. So I guess in terms of protecting their own health and safety and welfare, that is why administration recommends that they seek to have the structure certified as structurally sound. And through that process, they're able then to bring their property to compliance. And then that allows them, I guess, the peace of mind in terms of their insurance, knowing it's going to cover many eventualities that could occur their property, and it also removes, I guess, any encumbrances that may exist upon sale of the property.
Thank you, Mr Pickett. Are there any more questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got several questions on this item, as it's fairly important for councillors to understand some of the processes that go on within administration. I just want to go to the policy itself, Mr Pickett. It says under discovery of non-compliance, I'm going to use page 53, under discovery of non-compliance, the city may become aware of an alleged non-compliance or breach. It could be a neighbour, a landowner, for whatever reason, whether it be a telephone or writing, to then obviously act. Do we take anonymous inquiries for CRMs?
Mr Pickett.
Through you, Mayor, yes, the city does take anonymous complaints.
Do we treat those anonymous complaints the same as if it was somebody that was a neighbour or somebody else that was quite happy to put their name to the complaint? I guess what I'm getting to is I'm trying to understand whether you could have the vexatious nature of somebody just putting complaints in.
Mr Pickett, thank you.
Through you, Mayor, whilst administration does take anonymous complaints, it makes a judgment call as to whether or not it investigates them.
Thank you. Councillor Miles, do you have another question?
I do. So with that done, so when a complaint, I'm just trying to understand, obviously from my point of view, is when a complaint comes in, doesn't matter where from, and it comes into your team for some form of action, what sort of process do you initially take on that complaint initially? What is the first thing you do? I know I've read the policy, but is there worksheets that you go by? Is there a special process that you use to actually go down the list, as you were just saying, before you take it to that next stage?
Thank you. Mr Pickett, would you like to respond?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Typically, many of the phone calls come through CRC, so the front counter administration staff. So they try and gather as many details as possible, and there is a pro forma of questions that they ask to try and obtain names and addresses and details and so forth. And then when that information is passed on to the Health and Compliance Service Unit, the assessing officer will go through step by step every element of the complaint, and also review it in accordance with administration's processes and in accordance with the policy endorsed by council.
Thank you, Mr Pickett. Do you have another question,
So,
Councillor Miles?
So in item 1 of our policy on that very same page, obviously jurisdiction comes up. We spoke about it before, whether or not we have the jurisdiction to act on that complaint. So that would be assessed at that very early stage.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Mr Pickett, would you like to answer that question?
Through you, Mayor, yes.
Councillor Miles, do you have another question?
On that very item 1.1 on that second line, so if it's not within our authority, you're saying the city will refer it to the relevant authority for action. Do you get many of those complaints where you have to refer it on to some other action? And I think I was going back to a question that was asked by Councillor Rowe earlier.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Mr Pickett, would you like to answer his question?
Through you, Mayor, yes, the city does receive some of those types of complaints, but it is the vast minority of complaints. Health and the Compliance Services team last year investigated 2,400 CRMs. I would anticipate approximately 10 may have had to be referred to a different agency.
Thank you, Mr Pickett. Are there any more questions on this item? Councillor
Yes.
Miles, do you have another question?
I sure do. So on page 54, under your priority section, and then to 2.1E, and you just spoke about that, where the city will not take action in relation to those complaints which council determines are either frivolous or have been made with the intention to create mischief. So I guess looking at what we were just discussing, how early on do you make that? Do you do an inspection first and then you come back, and as a team you might talk about 2.1E and using that to say we're not going to process it? So I'm trying to understand how you might deal with that within your workflow on that job.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Mr Pickett, would you please respond?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Through you, Councillor, this section of the policy has been in place since initially endorsed by Council in 2015, but I will draw attention to the fact that it says the city will not take action in relation to those complaints which the Council determines are either frivolous or have been made with the intention to create mischief. So in relation to this element of the policy, it would be incumbent upon administration to prepare a report for a council decision. Administration would not make that decision.
Thank you, Mr Pickett. Do you have another question, Councillor Miles?
Yes. So with that being in mind, so section 3, which is right under that, obviously does also list a whole areas where administration won't take compliance action, and item C, 3.1C, obviously dictates that if there's been a constructed building or addition or something prior to the 2nd of April 2012, that the city would not take compliance action. Is that correct?
Mr Pickett, can you respond to that?
Through you, Mayor, this section relates to specifically the requirement for building approval. So as it states in the policy, where the building work is constructed or installed pre-April 2012, then the city may determine not to take compliance action. That's in relation to the building non-compliance. There is the potential that there may also be planning non-compliance, and 3.1c does not relate to the ability of administration to take planning compliance.
Thank you, Mr Piggott. Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Councillor Miles?
So, yeah, and I understand that. I guess I'm getting to the fact where, as I think we discussed previously by email and also by phone, that there are quite a few, we know structures, especially in old parts of Wanneroo, and including in people's backyards, that were put up prior to this date, whether it be a shed, patio, or whatever. So do you use Section 3C much out of those 2,000 odd complaints that you currently receive?
Thank you, Councillor Piles. Mr Piggott, would you like to respond?
Through you, Mayor, yes.
Thank you, Mr Piggott. Are there any more questions on this?
So can you provide
Councillor
to
Miles.
Council, Mr Piggott, the number of those non-compliance building works constructed, whether that be including acting CEO in our RAP? It'd be nice to know how many of those are being dealt with in that way.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Mr Piggott, are you able to respond to getting that for Councillor Miles and for the councillors, please?
Through you, Mayor, administration can investigate whether it's possible to provide those statistics. We will certainly do our best.
Thank you, Mr Piggott. Councillor Miles, do you have another question?
Not just now.
Okay, Councillor Baker.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. Look, just going back to Councillor Miles' question, specifically once again, clause 3.1c, and once again, all the sub-clauses in 3.1 set out the discretionary criteria. This section opens with the words, the city may determine not to take compliance action. But looking at 3.1c, you'd agree, wouldn't you, that in many instances, it can be very difficult to determine the date of construction and then be able to determine whether or not the Building Act of 2011 applies. Plus, in any event, even if that date can't be determined, if the city were to commence prosecution, the city bears the onus of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, to satisfy the trial magistrate as to the date of construction or the period of construction falling in a time frame after the formal commencement of the Building Act 2011. You'd agree with that, correct? In other words, the council bears the onus of proof in terms of satisfying the magistrate that the Act applies to this particular constructed dwelling or structure.
Mr Piggott, would you need to give that response in writing, or are you able to do a response now to that question?
Through you, Mayor, I'm happy to give a response now.
Go ahead, Mr Piggott.
In relation to your question, Councillor, the city, when it decides whether to take compliance action or not take compliance action, has to make its decisions based on evidence. So we use the evidence we have at hand. So that may be time-lapse aerial photography over a number of years, and through that process of reviewing photos at different times, it may give an indication of a window of time when a structure may have been completed, and that will guide administration as to whether or not it's appropriate to take compliance action from a building perspective, or to request the owner achieve building compliance. And nevertheless, that doesn't impinge upon the requirement to seek planning approval.
And a supplementary to that.
Thank you, Mr Piggott. You've got another question,
Just a supplementary
have you?
to that question,
okay,
please.
thank you, Councillor.
And of course, in some instances, the owner may actually make a formal, if you like, civil admission as to when the construction was completed. And if that admission relates to a date after the commencement of the provisions of the Building Act 2011, well, by their own admission, assuming that admission is admissible, they could be hung on their own words, correct?
Thank you,
Or they
Councillor.
could say, once again, look, it's not my problem. I bought the house this way. The shed was there. The carport was there. The lean-to was there. Don't blame me. Go and chase the previous owner.
Thank you,
President,
Councillor
thank you.
Baker. Mr Piggott, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. In relation to the decisions to take compliance action, I guess administration gives thought to the fact that we're not actively seeking to punish our residents and owners for having done the wrong thing. What we're trying to do is take an approach where we assist them to achieve compliance. So we're not specifically setting out from the outset to take them to court and to try and get them convicted. What we're trying to do is help them to achieve a compliant outcome in the most painless method possible. So it's not our intention to I guess, look for opportunities to punish. The way administration approaches it is in line with the city's corporate values, which are more around collaboration and respect and providing assistance.
Thank you, Mr Pickett. Councillor Herridge, you had a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick one. Listening to the conversation tonight, just wanted to note, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're actually looking at proposing minor amendments that don't even warrant advertising. We haven't gone to an extent of doing this in a forum. Is this correct for us to be doing this at the moment?
Thank you, Mr Pickett.
Through you, Mayor, yes, that's correct, Councillor, in terms of the fact that the proposed amendments are minor in nature and are really typographical fix-ups. The matter was taken to forum on the 15th of November, and there was a discussion held.
Thank you, Mr Pickett. If that's all of our questions for this evening, we'll move on to the next item of agenda, which is assets. Thank you, Mr Van Hayden and Mr Pickett, very much. Thank you, Mr Singh. We have one item on the agenda for assets this evening, which is the response to the petition PTO2 1122, which is requesting to remove speed humps from Blackmore Avenue, Girraween. Would you like to speak to this, Mr Singh?
Thank you, Mayor. I think the report is quite detailed and explains the issues in there. Most of the items raised during the deputation have been addressed in the report, so I'm happy to take questions on this one.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Do we have any questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Rowe, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I have quite a few, so I might just ask for the courtesy if other councillors wanted to speak first, just in case they are some of the same questions as me. So I'll just let anyone else speak first, if that's okay.
Okay, so Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had one sort of general question, and going along with the, I think it's the local area traffic management policy, have we considered anything formally or upcoming around removing speed humps as an option for tackling speeding and that sort of method, and looking towards other measures? Because I think some things that we keep repeating now are along the speed humps, which are causing quite a bit of a concern going forward now, and particularly if we're going to invest a lot of money into putting these traffic treatments in and then having to rip them up years later. So have we considered formally removing that totally as an option and sticking towards other methods like chicanes or median islands?
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, Council does receive from time to time these kind of concerns, residents requesting the removal of speed cushions or speed humps and similar kind of traffic treatments. There was a similar kind of petition received by the city back in 2016. There was a street in Clarkson, but at that time, that particular street met the criteria for installation of some kind of traffic treatments, and speed cushions were approved. After they were constructed, there was a petition presented to council. We investigated that in quite detail. I have referenced that in the report this evening on page 84. That was quite a detailed report. We examined options as should the speed cushions come out, what else can go in. The main issue was, if we have treated a risk by removing the speed cushion, we are bringing risk back. And that is not desirable. That presents a lot of challenge for council. So we are reintroducing the risk, and that could be, should something go wrong, traffic incident or crash, then council could be held liable in that respect. So they're all kind of based on the review which we did and based on the advice we received at that time. So we considered several options. given this particular petition was quite similar, I have referenced that table in this report on page 84 and 85. So there are several traffic treatments which can be considered. Again, it goes back to what works on each particular site, on each particular street could be different, and what provides the best value for money to achieve the outcome. Constructing, for example, median treatments is a possibility in some streets, is not in others. Similarly, constructing roundabouts could be possible, but you may have to construct a number of roundabouts in a long stretch of road. One roundabout doesn't fix the problem. And other kind of treatments like building mid-block islands, chicanes called normally. Similarly, they need to be placed at certain distance from each other. It applies to speed humps as well. They need to be placed at certain distance from each other to provide that kind of deterrent for people not to speed in that particular street. So yes, we have considered those kind of options. So far, from my recollection, we haven't gone back and removed speed cushions. Again, if it has happened at any stage, it would have been, some other treatment would have been put in its place.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Jordan, Ms Councillor Wright, do you have another
Yeah,
question?
just in supplementary. So from your response, you're saying that speed humps are obviously the most effective way, but you haven't considered, like in the table, for example, I know chicanes and other methods haven't been looked at in this case, and I know you said it varies street to street, suburb to suburb, but in terms of if we were to remove it, you're saying that the other methods don't eliminate the risk. Is that what you're saying from your previous response?
Mr Singh, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The other treatments will alleviate the risk, but those treatments, we haven't actually gone back and done the detailed analysis. We've done the desktop analysis. So, and I provided the pros and cons of each of those potential treatments, what they could bring. As you can see, some of those on page 85, the cost would be quite significant in comparison to what we currently have.
Thank you,
some of them
Mr.
may not be
Singh.
feasible either. Sorry.
Sorry.
Some of them may not be feasible, given that when we're looking at traffic treatments in any street, we consider the alignment of the street, horizontal and vertical alignment, how many intersections are already there, how are they spaced, any issues, for example, availability of street lights. So once you put traffic treatment, street lights need to be there as well to illuminate that particular treatment. It could otherwise become a hazard for the motorist. So there are several things we considered. Drivers, if there are too many drivers, there is a very little opportunity to provide these kind of treatments. Sometimes speed cushions are the only option left.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is just to confirm that in your report it says Girraween Avenue, the consultation with the residents along Girraween Avenue was conducted in October 2018, and more than 75% of the residents who responded supported the installation of the speed humps, and they were installed in March 2019. So does that mean these humps, these cushions, have only been there for 3 years? Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor Huntley. Mr Singh, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, there is a correction I need to make for next week's report in this particular paragraph. It shouldn't be saying Girraween Avenue, it should be saying Blackmore Avenue. And yes, they were only constructed about 3 years ago.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Coetzee.
Thank you. I just have a question there because I don't live there and I don't get there lots. So I haven't seen the old speed humps that was there. The ones that you've removed, was that that hard plastic ones that's almost concreted or bolted into the road?
Mr Singh.
Through Mayor, no. If you refer to, please, on page 89, there is an image of the humps.
So that's the ones that was installed previously?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Yes, Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. My question also refers to Templeton Crescent. Templeton Crescent is slightly different. The whole context of Girraween Condool have changed over the years, and when the speed humps were actually put into Templeton Crescent, I get a lot of phone calls on these also. They are not like the ones in Blackmore Avenue, and they are much closer together. A lot of people are getting very annoyed with those because they're not like the ones on the photograph at the back. Will council, or will administration, review some of their speed hump policies? Because in areas like these where hooning was a problem and speeding was a problem many, many years ago, the whole situation has eased off now. Will administration look into these in the future?
Thank you, Councillor Fidden. Mr. Fidden, Mr. Singh, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, at this point in time, they're being reconsidered or being reviewed on case-by-case basis. There is no plan at this point in place to review all speed cushions installed throughout the city. There are several streets where we have them. This particular one has been considered, again, from the desktop analysis point of view and considering what the existing treatment is doing. As we have outlined, the traffic data also support, and that probably will be the case in every case. Once you introduce some kind of traffic treatment, the traffic pattern will change, the behavior will change, and it forces it to change. If you got a speed cushion, you would imagine that these cars won't be speeding in that case. So that means the treatment we put in place is working, and that's why there'll be no point of removing that one unless we reintroduce some other mechanism of some different kind of treatment. So at this point in time, there is no plan to review any other traffic treatments or speed cushions in the city.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Councillor Herridge.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick one, and apologies for not sending this through earlier. Just coming from the deputation tonight, noting that there's been quite a petition and now the comments that have come through. Have we had any of those negative comments since instalment before now?
Mr. Singh.
Through you, Mayor, I may have to take that on notice. I'm personally not aware, but I can definitely check the data for the last 3 years. Have we received any CRMs or complaints?
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Councillor Baker, did you want to ask a question?
No, they've already been covered. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And Councillor Nguyen, would you like to ask a question?
When was the last traffic counts we've conducted on Blackmore Avenue in particular? Have we done one during this period when there's no speed humps?
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen. Yes, Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. On page 84, there's a table which defines when the speed counts were undertaken, traffic counts were undertaken, and they define the year, month, and the data there as well. So they were done before and after. The latest one was done in September 21.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. My question, very similar to Councillor Nguyen's. On page 84, as you outlined, you've got the traffic counts per day for both September of 21 and December of 11. And whilst we've got the 85% percentile speed and it's obviously reduced, what I also noticed there, you've got a big reduction in traffic counts on those days. So is there a correlation that you effectively, in doing this, you drove that other traffic away to other roads so they could still speed, and it's now just local people using it? Is there any method that you've been able to, I guess, understand where they've gone or and why? Yeah, because obviously it was very busy before and now it's down in some cases nearly 35%.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, that's possible. Traffic may have been redistributed in the area, but without doing the full traffic count for the whole precinct, for the whole network around this particular Blackmore Avenue Road, it'll be difficult to establish where the traffic had actually gone. So obviously there is in and out traffic from that particular suburb or that precinct. So to do that kind of bigger exercise to do the full traffic count for the whole precinct pretty much at the same time, that kind of a big exercise.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Nguyen.
Yes, and on that table, there seems to be a reduction in the speed in that area following the removal of the speed humps. If that was the case, and there seems to be a change in driver behaviour, is there still a need to install speed humps?
Mr. Singh.
Through you, Mayor, can I just clarify that we haven't removed the speed humps permanently from there. At the moment, the street is under traffic management due to the road resurfacing works which are undergoing, and speed humps will be reinstated. So the data which is there, it actually is after the speed humps were installed and they were still in place.
Thank you, Mr.
Sorry.
Singh.
I actually
Nguyen?
drove there most recently, and I don't think these humps have been installed yet on Blackmore Avenue.
Mr. Singh?
Yeah, through Mayor, they're going to be reinstalled. We have to remove them as part of the road resurfacing works which are undergoing at the moment. So that road is as a construction site at the moment under traffic management, and they will be reinstated at the same locations where they were before.
Yes, so
Thank you,
can I
Mr.
just...
Singh. Councillor Nguyen, you have
Can
another
I just
question?
clarify the data that you have on page 84, where, for example, September 2021, that was during the period when the speed hump has been removed? No?
Mr. Singh?
Through you, Mayor, this data relates to the time when speed humps were there.
Okay.
The speed humps have been temporarily removed only last 3 months, I think 2 or 3 months.
Yes. Sorry, my question earlier was, have we taken traffic counts after the speed humps have been removed?
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen. Mr. Singh?
Through you, Mayor, no. The reason for that is at the moment, it's a construction site under traffic management. Any traffic data we will take will not be true representative data.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Councillor Nguyen, do you have another
just a final question. Would it be possible for us to do a traffic count just to see what the driving behaviour is in that area before we install? Because we're going to be spending $150,000 to install something which at the moment the residents don't want. And if we can save $150,000, then and there's no longer that risk that has somehow maybe been reflected somewhere else, then that should be taken into account.
Mr. Singh?
Through you, Mayor, first of all, these speed humps are not new. They are reinstatements of the existing ones. They are being done as part of road resurfacing work, which is kind of part of our asset management road rehabilitation of that particular road. If we do collect traffic data now, as I said before, we should not be considering that. It won't be truly representative data, given that road is under traffic management, so we can't do a comparison with as is or normal situation. So data can be collected, but it won't be of no value to us.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Councillor Rowe, do you have any questions on this item? Thank you.
I do. Just in terms of a quick comment to begin, attachment 1 shows you the actual map from Google. It's worth noting that there are currently speed humps along Danbury Crescent, Blackmore Avenue and Templeton. So that's 3 connecting roads. So if you're a resident on Danbury, you're trying to get onto Wanneroo Road, you'll experience 3 sets of speed humps. Director, I have quite a few hyper-specific questions, and I've sent them through in advance just because they are that specific in nature. The 8 sets of speed humps located approximately 100 metres apart from each other, how was the number of speed humps determined, and is it standard practice under the local policy to space them 100 metres apart? Because I think quite a few of the negative comments are due to the number and the proximity.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Mr. Singh?
Thank you, Mayor. Generally, these kind of traffic treatments are spaced at 80 to 100 metres apart. The reason for that is if you leave a larger gap, then there's a potential for vehicles to speed up in between. To minimize that speeding, these are spaced between 80 to 100 metres apart. But we do consider sometimes the existing infrastructure in that particular street. If there is existing, for example, too many intersections, sometimes they can limit the scope, and also driveways. They keep coming back in the discussion. If there are too many driveways, there is not too much capacity to install these speed humps. But as a guide, 80 to 100 metres.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Councillor Rowe?
In October and November 2018, it said that 75% of respondents supported the installation of the speed humps. Do we know how many residents responded to community engagement? How many were included in the total catchment area? And can a copy of the public consultation be included in the report for next week?
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Mr. Singh?
Thank you, Mayor. We can definitely provide copies of the letters and the plans which were sent out for consultation. We can provide that to council members. The letters were sent to 80 properties fronting up Blackmore Avenue, and we received 21 responses.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Do you have any more questions, Councillor Rowe?
Yes. The height is disclosed as 70 millimetres of the speed humps that were currently, or not currently, but up until about 2 months ago on Blackmore Avenue. Is that standard for main roads guidelines due to the co-location with the bus route? And is this the smallest type of speed hump in terms of height, or is there another alternative that's not as high?
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Mr Singh?
Thank you, Mayor. Normally, these speed humps are about 100 mil in height, but in this case, they've been kept at 70 to meet the compliance with the bus requirements.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Do you have any more questions, Councillor Rowe?
So the traffic management score was 34, and given that this is one of the most common CRMs that I lodge is about speeding in local areas, and we get back the response that has the scores. I received one yesterday for Amberton Avenue in Girraween, which was 53, and administration's response was that traffic calming measures were not justified at this time due to lack of funding. Is the only reason that the speed humps were installed on Blackmore Avenue because state money was promised to cover the installation costs?
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Mr Singh?
Yes, yes, Mayor, that's correct. City received funding under Local Jobs, Local Projects Program in 2018, and in consultation with the Transport Department, this traffic treatment was implemented.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Rowe, do you have another question?
What is the difference in height between the speed cushions and the watt profile speed humps? And is there any evidence? Is there any evident difference between the longer-term impacts on motor vehicles? Because the deputation referred to some of the anecdotal evidence about the damage caused to the cars that consistently pass across that road.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Mr Singh?
Through you, Mayor, the only difference between those two type of humps and the cushions is the profile. Obviously, humps are a bit longer. The speed cushions are shorter, and in that sense, height is similar. The damage to vehicles can only happen if the speed is not complied with. If the vehicles going over those speed humps or cushions comply with the speed which is posted there, then there should not be a potential for damage to vehicles.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Do you have any more questions, Councillor Rowe?
Just two more.
Thank you.
The report acknowledges that main roads would not support, or would likely not support, the installation of speed signage. I'm thinking in particular the sign that's often on the entrance of a local road from a, not main arterial, but more of a distributor road, and it'll often say remember 50 in built-up areas. Is there a reason why main roads would not support it in this particular case? And is there any way that we could potentially request that?
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Mr Singh?
Thank you, Mayor. The main roads generally have they don't support the installation of any speed zone signs on the road which are clearly within built-up area, so it doesn't meet the definition of the signage requirements there, and where the default speed of 50 km/h applies. So, and again, as I said in the report, installation of signs alone is unlikely to resolve the speeding issues.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Councillor Rowe?
And the last question, does the city have any information about the circumstances of the one reported crash that has occurred on Blackmore Avenue since the installation of the speed humps?
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Mr Singh?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. For the publicly information which is available to us that indicates it was a rear-end crash accident which resulted in a property damage.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Are there any more questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify, I noticed when I go into other councils, Mr Singh, they also use the advisory signs, which are yellow, so they're not speed with the red circle, and also quite a few of them are using the LED flashing ones, advising you that you are speeding. Has the city got any of those? And if not, why not?
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Mr Singh?
So, you Mayor, there are two different kinds of signs which Councillor Miles has mentioned. One is the Remember 50 built-up area signs. We do have a very small number of signs. There was a report presented to Council, I think, a couple of years ago, where Main Road actually wrote to all local authorities asking local authorities to remove those signs within a certain period. So Council decision at that time was not to remove them, but right back to Main Road, so look, we will continue to use them, but they won't be at a particular street for a certain period of time. Then they'll keep moving, and that's what we are doing. The second type of signs, which are the flashing ones, we have, I think, 4 of them. They both, 2 went in more recently. One is Huntington Parkway, one on Ningara Road. The other 2 are, I think, in the Avenue in Alexandra Heights. They basically, they don't warn people that you are overspeeding. They simply give you the speed you're traveling.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Do you have another question, Councillor Miles?
Yeah, just to follow on from that, and looking at this report, which is very comprehensive, and I think even the deputation, the person that did the deputation, acknowledged that. Is there, in the southern wards, is there an excessive speeding problem going on? Because when I look at this map that you provided on page 88, there seems to be quite a lot of traffic calming measures in a lot of streets. So is there an endemic problem down there that we need to ask our police officers down there to be more vigilant, or, you know, what is going on? Because as a council, we can only do so much.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Mr Singh?
So, Mayor, I can't give you a response on the first one, whether it's just a problem in the southern ward or elsewhere. We do get to see CRM throughout the city with speeding issues and being raised. So, regarding the one thing which is different in Giravin, Kandula or other southern wards, the roads are much wider. So that's how they were constructed when they were constructed at the time. And they kind of invite the environment actually become more conducive to drive on high speeds. And that is potentially the reason there are more traffic treatments in those roads.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Any other questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Just one. Would there be any possibility that administration, and this is probably putting you on the spot, Director, would there be any possibility that administration would support a reduction in the reinstallation of speed humps, as in 8 is the current level, either to 6 or 4?
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Mr Singh.
Through you, Mayor, I think in that case, we are re-inviting the risk back for the speeding in those sections. So if you remove a set in one direction, that's going to increase the distance between the speed cushions, and then that will result, give an opportunity for motorists to speed in that section. So therefore, suggestion is, in that case, the recommendation is not to make any change.
Thank you, Mr Singh.
If that's the case, I'll foreshadow an amendment for next week.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Are there any more questions on this item? If there are no more questions, thank you, Mr Singh, and we move on to Community in Place. And our first item for Community in Place is item 4.5, and it's the Alkimos Aquatic and Recreation Centre progression to detailed design. And Ms Terrelink, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, there are 2 items this evening from Community in Place, and I was proposing to briefly introduce item 4.5. So in terms of this project, the process has come to the point where we're looking at a decision now to move to the next phase of the project. So to date, we have done needs and feasibility studies that have been presented to Council. We've done a business plan, site selection, concept design development. We've done community consultation on the concept design, and we've also done extensive advocacy for the external funding. And that has resulted in a commitment of a further $25 million from the federal government to enable the project to progress. So what we're proposing now is to move the project to detailed design phase, and that will include preparation of the documentation and then a tender for the detailed design, and then undertaking the detailed design itself. So that we can move this project to the next stage. In terms of the funding, to date we have secured $65 million funding for the project. The intention is that during the detailed design phase we will incorporate a range of, options to look at value engineering the design, getting specialist construction advice to assist with ensuring that we're getting the best value for money possible, and we'll also be looking at identifying separable portions through the detailed design as well, and the detailed design process will enable us to firm up what the ultimate costs of the facility will be. Effectively, we're looking to take it, as I've indicated, to the next stage, which would be detailed design.
Thank you, Ms Terrelek. Do we have any questions on this item? Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is directed to Ms Terrelek. I referred to paragraph 3 on page 92 of the agenda. It makes reference to the fact that negotiations for the acquisition of the land required for the centre are nearing completion, and it's anticipated that a report will be presented to Council in early 2023. Just in relation to the land acquisition issue, is it the city's plan, so to speak, with this facility to construct the facility and then acquire title to the land, as happened in the case of the development of Splendid Park, or not? Or will it be the other way around, please?
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Ms Terrelek.
Thank you, Mayor. The intention certainly would be that we would acquire title to the land prior to construction commencing. It could be that, depending on when that occurs, we may need access to the site. However, I understand that the negotiations for the acquisition of the land are nearly complete, so certainly anticipating that will come to Council early in 2023.
Thank you, Ms Terrelek. Councillor Baker, do you have another question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Once again to Ms Terrelek. In terms of the, well, I gather there's no agreement as such, of course. I know that negotiations are still underway. They've been on foot for several months, but is there any, in principle, understanding that Development WA will be responsible for providing the various infrastructure services to site, such as electricity, water, etc., or is that something that will simply be passed on to the city during the course of the construction of the facility, please?
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Ms Terrelek.
Yes, through you, Mayor. While a detailed report will come to Council in the new year, the intention certainly is that it will be a serviced lot.
Thank you, Ms Terrelek. Are there any further questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Nguyen.
What's the budget for the operational costs once the centre is built?
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen. Ms Terrelek.
Through you, Mayor, I think that is in the long-term financial plan, but I would have to take that question on notice.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, I guess, some of what Councillor Baker was asking. In the financial implications and I guess the funding source, I just want to make sure, I understand we are not paying for this land. It's going to be given over free of use. Is it going to be on a lease, 99-year lease, or is it going to be given title to the city?
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Ms Terrelek.
Thank you, Mayor. I might ask Ms Jennings to answer that question.
Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. We are still obviously finally negotiating, so I don't want to preempt a lot of things except to say that there is an aspect that comes from the developer contributions as well, so that's a major part of it, but the rest of it will report in the report next year.
Thank you, Ms Jennings. Are there any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions, we'll move on to item 4.6, place activation. Are there any questions on item 4.6? If there are no questions on item 4.6, thank you, Ms Terrelek. And we move on to corporate strategy and performance. Item 4.7, the financial activities statement. Do we have any questions on the financial activities statement? Yes, Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor, and this one was also sent with advance notice. Page 140 of the agenda refers to savings from Highclere Boulevard Traffic Management Scheme being diverted to the upgrade of street landscaping on Marmion Avenue. Can I just clarify that the nature of these savings were diverted to a project that was also intended to improve safety conditions on that main arterial road?
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. One thing I did want to say on this report is that there is a section, and you found it anyway, that relates to the report needing an absolute majority. But the particular question, Mr. Singh will be able to answer, please.
Mr. Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yes, I can confirm that the funds going to Marmion Avenue, which is for the duplication completed a couple of years ago. This is the payment of a late invoice, which has come now. So yes, it did help to improve traffic safety in that 11.5 kilometre stretch of Marmion Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is on page 140. The last paragraph refers to Hinkley Park Hocking, that an additional 15,000 is required to complete CCTV. And my understanding was that the original project and the current layout of the park has the conduits for the CCTV system, but it actually hasn't been installed. So have we got a time frame on this project if it was to be approved by council when this would be completed?
Thank you, Councillor Wright. I think that would go to Mr. Singh. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I may have to update that as part of the report or provide further information to council members before next week.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Are there any other questions on this item? If there are no... yes, Councillor Nguyen.
Sorry, on page 144, that's the statement of financial position where we have the total equity of just over $2.5 billion. Why is that in bracket? Does that mean it's a negative?
Ms. Jennings, would you like to respond to that?
Sorry, through the chair, is that the one on the attachment 1? Are you talking about attachment 1?
Yes.
And the figure at the bottom of the page?
Yeah, shouldn't that be a positive figure?
That is a positive, I think. Let's have a look. Current assets, net assets. I'll just check with Mr. Tashara, please.
Yes, Mr. Tashara.
Through Mayor, total equity and total assets should equal. So if it's a negative, it's the typing error. So we need to make it positive.
I was a bit concerned for a moment there.
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen. Are there any more questions on this item? If there are no more questions on this item, we'll move on to item 4.8, the warrant of payments. Do we have any questions on the warrant of payments? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I refer to page 167 of the agenda, expense item 10173. The date of expenditure 10 October 2022. The payee, and reading what it states here, Air Force Association WA Division Inc. And in the particulars are $900 refund of overcharged fee for extra water body for swimming pool water sampling, -2013 to 2021. Could I have some further particulars as to why it was that for nearly 10 years this association, which I understand is different to the RAFA Inc., it's the RAF Inc., how did this overcharging arise? That's the first question. That can be taken on notice, obviously. I apologise. Nothing in writing.
Ms Jennings will be taking that on notice.
Okay.
Do you want a second question as well?
Yes, another one on notice too. Page 179 of the agenda, expense item 10388, date of expenditure, the same date, 10 October. The payee, or the recipient, was West Coast 4x4 Recovery Proprietary Limited, $285. Particulars: recover bogged Ford Ranger -Caramar golf course. What are the particulars of that? Was it a Ranger Services vehicle, which just happened to be a Ford Ranger? How did it get bogged, and what are we doing pulling bogged vehicles out of golf courses? Surely the city would have the requisite vehicles and equipment to do that itself, rather than outsourcing to a four-wheel drive recovery specialist. Please, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. I think that will be taken on notice as well.
Thanks very
much. Is that correct, Ms Jennings? Thank you. Are there any more questions on the warrant of payments? If there are no more questions on the warrant of payments, we'll move on to item 4.9, the Service Review Working Group, aims, guiding principles and prioritisation criteria. Are there any questions on this item? Any questions? Is that a question, Councillor Baker? Well, I think if you're trying to invent one, I think we'll move on to the next item.
Oh, all right. I'll save
Okay.
it up for next week. Thank you, Madam.
So we'll move on to the next item, item 4.10, service reviews prioritisation. Are there any questions on item 4.10? Thank you. If there are no questions on item 4.10, we move to item 4.11, which is donations to be considered by Council, December 22. Are there any questions on that item? Thank you, Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. And I just note in the report, notwithstanding the merit of the donation request for this year, it does say that if it's continued in future years, there'd need to be some budgetary discussions about whether it would be feasible and where that funding would come from. Would that be an item that would be likely to be discussed in the budget workshop process or more of an internal budget decision?
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Ms Jennings?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. It's more likely to be just part of the operational budget, but I'll just check with Deputy Director Community whether there's anything to add.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink.
Thank you, Mayor. So, yes, at this point in time, we are looking at the one-off budget allocation because we have only given youth care less than 12 months' notice that we're no longer running the charity golf day. But certainly it will be consideration as part of the ongoing operational budget to see whether the contribution goes beyond that.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Yes, Councillor Rowe.
And just the other question I had, is the state government the main primary financial contributor for youth care chaplaincy services in public education, as in we're just sort of providing additional support and donations?
Ms Terrelink?
Yes, through you, Mayor. So I do understand that schools can access youth care chaplaincy services through state or federal government chaplaincy funding, and they usually contribute to the cost of about 1.5 days of chaplaincy per school. The City of Wanneroo has previously provided support from the charity golf day to the 7 secondary schools in the City of Wanneroo, which does allow them to offer additional days of chaplaincy services.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Councillor Coetzee.
Sorry, just a quick question about the Golf Charity Day. Do you have it, the number on hand of how much the city made that day off just the golf day?
Thank you, Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, I think the last donation we may have made to youth care was in the vicinity of about $35,000.
Can I
Thank you,
follow
Ms
up?
Terrelink. Yes,
So
Councillor
that
Coetzee.
means, sorry, thanks. So does that mean we made 35,000 a day of everybody who played golf? So all the teams who paid an X amount to play, so that was $35,000?
Ms Terrelink.
Yes, through you, Mayor. So yes, we certainly donated the fees that were paid by the different teams to enter the competition. And the city then paid for the remainder of the costs in terms of running the event.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Yes, Councillor
So how much did it cost the city then to have that day?
Ms Terrelink.
Through you, Mayor, I'd need to take that on notice.
Maybe we should bring the golf day back.
Ms.
Good idea.
Okay, Councillor Baker.
Yes, thank you, Madam Ed. A question to Director Terrelink. I think I know the answer, but I don't think it's spelled out in the report. The event purports to be a charity day style event, but is it the case that the Church's Commission on Education Incorporated, or Inc., is a charity under the State Charitable Collections Act, and also is it on the National Charities Register, the federal government charities register? Is it named as a recognised charity, which has consequences in terms of donations to it being tax deductible if they have approved donee status? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Ms Terrelink.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll take that question on notice.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? Thank you, Councillor Nguyen.
I know there were 8 secondary schools within the City of Wanneroo that are part of this funding request, were there any other high schools within the city that are not considered, or how are they chosen for this funding?
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen. Ms Terrelink?
Through you, Mayor, they would be my understanding is that these are the government schools that are in the city of Wanneroo, so it doesn't apply to private schools.
Thank you, Ms Terrelink. Are there any other questions? If there are no more questions on this item, we'll go to item 4.2, which is the annual review of the 3-year strategic internal audit plan. Do I have any questions on item 4.12? I have no questions on item 4.12. I move to item 4.13, the strategic risk register update. Do I have any questions to this item? I have no questions to that item. I move on to item 4.14, the extension of review dates for council policies. Do I have any questions on this item? No questions. Item 5, we have no motions on notice to discuss at the moment. We have a late report that's been separated under a separate cover, which is the long-term financial plan and 20-year capital works program, 2023-24 to 2042-43, item 6.1. Are there any questions on this item? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'm assuming the questions are to the acting CEO tonight. With the one of the things that I guess I wanted to ask is, whilst I know that we've been working on the long-term financial plan, I guess the question I have to ask administration is, should we not have had a look at the capital works program first and then done the long-term financial plan?
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Ms Jennings.
Through the Chair, yes, we have been looking at capital works program as part of this work over the long term, and what happens then is we might look again at the annual budget for that particular year, but we always do look at the overall capital works plan as part of the long-term financial plan.
Thank you, Ms Jennings. Any more questions, Councillor Miles?
Because you know, if you go sort of halfway down to that page, I was sort of, obviously it says the target municipal capital contribution, which we allocate roughly $20 million per year for capital works. But you've also got a note in there that obviously a closer review is going to be required in the 2nd, 3rd, 5th and 8th and 13th years of this particular long-term financial plan. So I guess that's why I asked the question, is maybe we could have smoothed it out better if maybe some of those capital works were either pushed out a bit further or dropped altogether. Would you not agree?
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. We actually changed the long-term financial plan at a general level because we went from 25 million down to 20 million to try and smooth it out. Because of the nature of capital projects, sometimes they're a bit lumpier in some years than others, but that doesn't mean that it's not doable. It just means as we get closer, we'll be able to refine it. So we've just pointed out a couple of years that perhaps, you know, a particular item makes it 22 million instead of 20 million, but it's not an exact science over the 20-year period. But broadly, we've been able to settle around that amount.
Thank you, Ms Jennings. Yes, Councillor Miles, do you have another question?
Yes, and on page 3, under the variables, and we all understand variables, they're going on all over the place at the moment, but I was interested in the population growth for us as a city. Now, we're still pegging our population at between 2 and 3.4%, according to ID Forecast, and I do trust ID Forecast. However, we are using December of 21 stats. Are we not able to use something a bit newer, or has it had not been done as yet for this year?
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Yes, Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, that's the latest we have available at the moment.
Any more questions on this item?
Is that-
Councillor Miles?
Yeah, with the population growth, obviously that's new homes that are being built within our area. Are we tracking, are we tracking within that band with our current applications for titled lots being released by the city?
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Ms Jennings?
Thank you, Mayor. There were actually periods during last year where we went higher. But we try and be as conservative as possible over the 20-year period. So it fits at the moment.
Thank you, Ms Jennings. Any other questions on this item? Councillor Miles, you haven't finished yet.
No. So under the variables, I also wanted to have a look at the rates base, and I do want to get this on public record because it is important for residents to understand. So can you just clarify how the city administration, and obviously the city will decide, or the council will decide next week, how the rate base has been forecast at CPI of 2.5%?
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Ms Jennings?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Actually, the item above, Consumer Price Index, also helps with answering that particular question, because we've looked at the forecasts that we have over future years, including also looking at the Reserve Bank Australia's target for where they like to sit the annual inflation rate as an average. So that's the safest place for us to predict over a 20-year period, rather than trying to somehow predict what might actually happen in a particular year.
Thank you, Ms Jennings. How many more questions have you got, Councillor Miles?
Well, I'm just going through my list. It is a
How
brief...
many more questions have you got, Councillor Miles?
Point of order and clarification, Mayor.
There's no point of order or
There is
clarification.
point of
I'm presiding over this thing. How many more questions
Point of order
have
on
you got?
clarification, Mayor.
How many more questions
This
have you
is
got?
a briefing
Councillor-
session,
Councillor
and briefing
Wright-
sessions under
Councillor
the
Wright
Act
has a
says
question.
that I can ask questions.
That's correct. I'm
Right.
not saying you can't ask questions. I'm asking you how many more questions you have to ask.
As many as it takes.
Okay, well, I want to give Councillor Wright an option to ask his question because you've asked quite a few so far. Councillor Wright, would you like to ask your question?
I'm happy to wait for Councillor Miles, if...
I've given you that opportunity. Please ask your question.
Okay. My question was going off Councillor Miles' second question, I think, about the rates base. I just want to clarify, because I was unfortunately absent from that meeting, just clarifying that the final, I guess, decision was made that it was CPI plus 2%. Is that correct?
Through the Mayor, we haven't made a decision as yet. So this is a recommendation from administration for CPI plus 2%.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have any more questions, Councillor Wright?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Miles?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just also on page 4, I just want to clarify the waste fee. Obviously, the city has done an extremely good job in maintaining the waste fee for the last 4 years. Is administration thinking that this fee could possibly change over the next couple of years, or do they believe that there's some sort of scenario that could pop up to make that fee increase?
Mr Singh, would you like to respond to that question?
Thank you, Mayor. The gate fee, we are dependent upon the decision which MRC makes on members' behalf. So MRC is considering a number of projects at this point in time. So should those projects eventuate, the circumstances may change and the gate fee may change. But at this point in time, MRC hasn't made any decisions. At this point in time, the waste continues to go to Tamala Park landfill, and the gate fee we are paying is $145 a tonne.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Mr Miles or Councillor Miles, do you have another question?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just with regarding the interest yield, and I want to just ask a question on administration on this. With our capital, with our reserves, our cash reserves, that is made up of both municipal money and developer contribution money. When the yield goes up, as illustrated in here, because obviously the interest rates are going up, are we able to use some of the interest earned through the developer contributions for municipal purposes, or do we have to use it for what's in the developer contribution plan?
Ms Jennings.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, the developer contribution plans require their own interest to be kept. It's kind of like a trust almost that we're keeping there for the developer contributions.
Thank you, Ms Jennings. Any more questions? Yes, Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to lead on from the question that Councillor Miles asked, if I recall the words used, Director Jennings said that the notion of CPI plus 2% for the next financial year is merely a recommendation at this stage. And of course, that is just that, a recommendation. But when it comes to setting rates for the 23-24 financial year, it seems to me to be so far away, so to speak, in real terms, it's difficult to foresee with any accuracy what the national and international prevailing economic circumstances will be, certainly from 1 July next year onwards. Just wondering, is there flexibility in that recommendation, or is that recommendation it, so to speak? Because I don't have a crystal ball, and obviously the Governor of the Reserve Bank doesn't either, for obvious reasons. Just wondering how can we sort of outbid him, so to speak, or out-opinionate him? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Ms Jennings, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is a really important point because this is actually the long-term financial plan we're talking about. Next year we'll work on the annual budget and we'll make a decision on what might happen in next year's budget. This is purely for a long-term plan of 20 years. So that's what's being applied across the 20 years to make sure that we have a sustainable outcome for that period of time. Next year we will deal with the annual budget.
Thank you. Any other questions on this? Yes, Councillor Miles.
Thank you. I'm not sure, I think I know the answer to it. On page 26 of the report, Ms Jennings, there is the Capital Works program for 23-24, 42-43, and I understand all of that. However, with the reserve, it's saying reserves of $695 million. Is that DCP only, and should that reflect that, what that reserve is? Because the municipal is 2 lines up.
Just a moment. You two are having a conversation over there. Is it related to this item, or do we need to share what's happening? We'll answer this question, but we need a question from you guys if you're talking about it so the whole room can share it, that's all. Ms Jennings, would you like to respond to Councillor Miles's question?
Thank you, Mayor. The funding sources there is at the highest level. So the reserves that I mentioned there are all kinds of reserves. So as you know, we use the asset replacement reserve for a lot of asset renewal reserve, etc. So that includes DCP as well as all those reserves. Although grant, and there's grants from obviously come from various sources, but contribution can also be the DCP. So generally the reserves are more our muni-funded reserves, cashback reserves.
Thank you. I'll just go to Councillor Huntley. Did you have a question or something you wanted to discuss? Thank you.
No, Madam Mayor, we didn't. We were just actually looking at how the financial plan, or how CPI gets exaggerated out over the 20 years to make it operational at 2% plus, or sorry, CPI 2 plus 2.
Absolutely correct. Thank you, Councillor Huntley. And any other questions on this item? If there are no more questions, we'll move to questions received in writing. 7.1, we had a question from Mrs Dot Newton about warrant of payments for the period to the 31st of October 2022. 10223 travel and monthly allowance, please separate. 102 by Director of Corporate Strategy and Performance said September allowance 10223 for Councillor Baker was $2,668.77 allowance and $229.12. Travel expenses, item 10230 for Mayor Aitken Myself was $11,564.47 allowance and $287.99 travel expenses, with $175.49 for corporate apparel. In relation to the pages being portrait, the questioner will be contacted to clarify which pages. Thank you.
Question?
Yes, Councillor Baker.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'll note that only you and myself were targeted, so to speak. Are you aware that my monthly allowance is a standard monthly allowance paid to other councillors? And are you aware that travelling from where I live in Yanchep to the city is 30 k's each way, a total of 60 kilometres? And if I make that trip on 4 days each month, that easily can explain away the $226 expense. I think the most distant residing councillor is Councillor Coetzee, who resides 2.7 kilometres, and I forget the millimetres, to the north of where I live. But yeah, so just to assist the questioner, that's the reason. It's a 60k return trip. My car's quite thirsty, and that expense claimed is quite reasonable because you'll note it excludes speeding fines as well if I'm running late. So obviously I'll carry the cost of the speeding fines. Just by the further and better particulars in the interests of open and accountable local government. Thank you.
And can I say that my mileage, I did well over 500 kilometres in my electric vehicle, so I think it was very, very convenient and very cost effective for the community as well. But anyway, we'll leave that at there, Councillor Baker.
No, I think, to be fair though, electric vehicles don't incur any costs at all. It's all free, remember.
It's wear and tear and the electricity.
Read your manual again, please, madam.
On that note, I did a lot of mileage. We'll just move on to the next item, which is item 8.1, which is confidential. If we don't have any questions to item 8.1, I won't go into confidential session. Do you have a question about?
Perhaps I can leave it to the ordinary council meeting, ma'am, because we have to go behind closed doors on that occasion anyway.
Okay,
I'll foreshadow the question. Well, I can't because it will...
No, you can't do a question now unless we go behind...
No, I think we should leave it for the next ordinary.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea. So we'll move on to the date of the next meeting, item 9. The next ordinary council meeting has been scheduled for 6 p.m. on Tuesday the 6th of December 2022 to be held at the Council Chamber Civic Centre, 23 Dundebar Road, Wanneroo. And the item 10 is closure, and the meeting closed at 2013. Thank you.